The FDA is really a stepping stone to get the products on the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the FDA to put your products on the market. And once you start looking at, who's paying for the applications for drug companies. I mean, the average person doesn't know a lot of this stuff. Neither do our doctors, which is really interesting.
Yep.
So that in itself, and I think that, people think, even when you just said 1 to 3%, well, I'm kind of guessing that your drug, kind of like the antidepressants, once it gets into the real world, which I think the real world is really what, like you and I are the people that, and it's who I've always said I advocate for is the middle of America, meaning the average person. It's not the people, when these drugs come onto the market, any drug, you got to remember, they're going to put the best conditions around it for the clinical trials to get what they need to have go forward. Right. So in itself, like just because it says they didn't see side effects. No, it's when millions of people start taking them. It's when the advertising kicks in. It's when they start getting overprescribed, or now you have like and we see with the antidepressants, these online telehealth companies, right?
Yeah.
That it just keeps growing and growing and growing. After Wood died, and we went with another family and we brought some experts, and we actually met with the top FDA officials, Dr. Lochran and Temple back in the day. And I really, 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 this is like how naive I was. I really thought that they would be interested in, like, we come in, we had like this private meeting, and we and said, like, how did a guy go from not sleeping to head outside the body dead in 5 weeks?
Yeah.
This would be like, this is like a perfect kind of storm, right?
Right.
They literally said, oh, you're just an anecdote. That's just anecdotal. And so it made me really realize at the beginning, like, they don't go investigate like I thought they would, like the FAA and NTSB. I thought, like the people who build and approve the planes aren't the ones that if there's a plane crash, right, and go look at the black box. They don't. That's not the case. And when he literally said, "You are just an anecdote," I'm like, oh my God, this is what because we didn't see it in the exactly what he said. We didn't see it in the double-blinded, placebo-controlled study.
Today's guest is someone whose story has changed the way the world looks at antidepressants and drug safety. In 2003, Kim Witczak's husband, Woody, was prescribed Zoloft for mild insomnia and stress. Just a few weeks later, he took his own life. He had no history of depression or suicidal thoughts. And at the time, there were no warnings about the risk of suicidality. That tragedy sent Kim searching for answers. And what she uncovered was shocking. A system more focused on protecting drug companies than protecting patients. She filed a lawsuit against Pfizer. Not for money, but for accountability. The case was dismissed, but her fight didn't end there. It became her mission. Since then, Kim has become one of the most respected voices for drug safety in the country. She now serves as the consumer representative on the FDA's Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Committee, where she's worked to strengthen suicide warnings, push for transparency, and ensure families receive real informed consent before taking psychiatric medications. Kim's story is about more than loss. It's about purpose, courage, and moral conviction. And she represents exactly what moral medicine stands for: truth, accountability, and the human side of healthcare.
Oh, yeah. So, I've always had this huge issue. Like, everybody uses the chemical names, right? They use the chemical names. So like, even when you just said, which, I can never say the chemical names, that's part of my problem. But like, okay. So like Propecia, or like when I had done the FDA advisory. So I've spoke before the FDA advisory committees for a long time. That's really how I started with my advocacy, is going before the FDA at the antidepressant hearings, right? A long time ago. But I had recently done, or maybe it was a couple of years ago, for Singular, which is an asthma medicine for kids. So you can, like, all of a sudden parents and people start contacting me, and they're like, do you know this issue about this and how the FDA has not added black box warnings? And I'm like, no. So I start learning about it, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the same issue, but it's really not the same issue. I mean, it's the same thing, repeat.
Yes, absolutely.
And people think it's just an isolated. So you might have thought, oh, it's just an isolated with Propecia, because that's kind of your entry point into it. My entry point is antidepressants. So I thought, oh, this is just an issue with antidepressants. Well, I've been doing my advocacy work now for 22 years. And I'm telling you, it's the same story every time,
It's
which
everywhere.
is drugs come on the market and people don't think that they think safe and effective.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctors have been told safe and effective, and fast forward. No, we don't talk about harms. And harms are never talked about until it gets into the real world. People like you and me, and then people even so, which I think is the beauty of what's happening now with like social media, and we're able to connect media. Because back when I was getting involved, you had to actually get on a plane and go and connect with people. Now you at least are like, you and I are able to have this conversation, and you start realizing, wait, it's not one. Everybody thinks harms are one-offs, but when you start connecting it, you're like, whoa, this is a huge issue. And so I'm super grateful that you're having me on, your platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right about that, because I didn't realize how much corruption there really was until I got involved in this. I mean, like you said, I thought it was just finasteride. This is kind of a one-off here. It amazed me that the drug's been on the market for 30 years, but I'm thinking this has got to just be unique to this drug. And then you start looking at SSRIs, and you start, learning about Vioxx. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. That killed 50 to 70,000 Americans in the early 2000s. And Merck knew that it was going to cause cardiovascular issues for a subset of its consumers, and they still pushed it to market. And now 50 to 70,000 people are dead. And most people don't even know about that, which is insane. It's like they somehow keep this out of the media. And like you said too, thank God for social media, because this is why these issues are growing. They've always been around. They've always been there. This isn't some type of new wave issue that, these fear mongers are coming online and talking about. They've always been there, but now the word's getting out because so many people are speaking out about it. So
yeah, absolutely. And so when you said Vioxx, that's really where, so if I go back into my story, how I actually even got into this work, right? I don't know if you want me to start there or not.
Yeah. That was kind of the first question here. So jump into it.
Yeah. So, I always say I like to call myself the accidental advocate, because I was just living life, happily married to my husband of, 10 years. And back in 2003, so that's 22 years ago, on August 6th, I get a call from my dad. Woody's dead. I'm like, what? This is my husband of 10 years. I go, what do you mean he's dead? He was found dead hanging with no history of depression, right? No history of depression. He had just recently, earlier in 2003, had started his dream job with a startup company, having trouble sleeping, which he was a guy that needed 8 hours of sleep. He would always fall asleep if he didn't, right? And I always call him Humpty Dumpty, because he went to the doctor because he was a big athlete. So he was a basketball player. They bit him in his head, and so he had to go get stitches. He found out that, he was allergic to penicillin when his appendix broke. So he always thought like doctors did no wrong, right? And they fixed his knees. So he went to the doctor on June 30th. Of 2003, 5 weeks before he was found, and went in because he was having trouble sleeping, waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, which I always think is like now is just kind of, this is what life is, right? But the doctor gave him a 3-week sample pack of the drug, the antidepressant drug, Zoloft, and said it would take the edge off and help him sleep. Woody, I happened to be out of the country the first 3 weeks Woody was on the drug. I had just, we both traveled all the time for work, but I was a producer in advertising. So I was down in New Zealand on a big BMW shoot. So I wasn't home those first 3 weeks Woody got put on the drug.
Sure.
And I come back, and I'll never forget, Woody came through our back door. I was super excited to see him. He by now has been on the drug for 3 weeks. He comes in, he's bawling. I've never seen him bawling, falls to the back of the door, completely drenched through his dress shirt, and fell into a fetal position. And he kept going, Kim, you got to help me. I don't know what's happening to me. My head's outside my body. And he's bawling. And he's like, I don't think I can handle this. And so calmed him down. Of course, I've never seen this. Called his doctor. The doctor said, you got to give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. Every night the next week of Woody's life, Woody was like, what do you think about acupuncture? I'm going to beat this feeling in my head. So fast forward, when my dad called, because I hadn't heard from him, my dad goes over there. I mean, this would have been the last, literally in 1 second, my entire life blew up. I'm in the middle of a BMW shoot again. And I was like, what? So of course my life fell apart, but that night I was like, it made no sense. Like Woody loved life. We just booked our 10-year anniversary. We were just starting to talk about having a family. We booked our Thanksgiving trip with his parents. Like we had all these plans. Like it made literally no sense. But that night the coroner got on the phone and asked me a simple question. Was Woody taking any medication? And the only medication he was on was Zoloft. And she goes, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death. Clue number one. Clue number two, the exact same day that Woody was found, there was a front page article in the Minneapolis Star Tribune that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. The exact same day. And so fast forward, Woody left no notes. We left notes all the time when we both traveled. They're usually honey-do lists or, whatever. But there was, I'm like, on the biggest trip of your life, Woody, you didn't leave a note. But subsequently, I've kind of come to realize those were the notes, right? Yeah. The fact that the coroner asked me that question and says she's going to take the drug with her. The front page of our newspaper had an article. But that night, when, our whole family's life just fell apart in just my dad running over there to see, hey, I think Woody's been having trouble sleeping. So this is this could have been like the furthest thing. So, of course, like our whole family never once questioned the drug, even back then, because, it was given to him by his doctor.
Right.
Safe and effective, advertised. And we blindly trusted. Right. But how did Woody go from not sleeping, head outside his body, to dead, hanging in 5 weeks? 5 weeks. Yeah. So my brother-in-law that night, because, I'm just trying to figure out how to get home from out of town. My brother-in-law goes home and Googles Zoloft and suicide. We had no idea that the FDA held hearings in 1991 on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. And there was like video that was out there from 91, and it's family after family after family coming forward. And then the advisory committee, right, that advises, it's supposed to be an outside group of experts sitting on the committee. They all, who, by the way, the majority of them all took monies from manufacturers of antidepressant products. They all went, nope, we don't see anything. So fast forward, now it's 2003. We've now got Zoloft, Paxil on the market. It's being used for kids. And so that's really the entry point of my, why I call myself the accidental advocate. Yeah. And literally in that moment when your life falls apart, you just start investigating everything. Like, how the hell did this just happen? Right. And that's really what, once we started learning this, it became our kind of mission to go get warnings put on these drugs.
Yeah. Good for you. That's absolutely incredible. It's amazing that hearing in 1991 wasn't more mainstream either. Like you had to do your research to realize that even occurred,
Well, you know what? It's interesting. It actually did have a lot of media back in 91. Okay. Well, I meant, like it was covered on, the nightly news, etc. But here's the thing. When I was in college, so like I wasn't at all, like it wasn't even in my ether and I wasn't watching news. Right. And so why would I think anything of it? And then, when the FDA never really followed up on Eli Lilly, who made Prozac, and they never, so I didn't think anything of it. But it's why I also think so we started going out to DC and we pushed and worked with Congress and we met all these other families that had the same kind of story, that like test anxiety, a 12-year-old hung himself, it was just the same story over and over and over from the same ones that were from 91. Right. Right. So ultimately we helped to push and get black box suicide warnings on. But I say even like, it's why I love that you're having this conversation. Right. Because people today don't know, because if they were in high school, college, they didn't know what all the work that we did in 2004 and 2006. Like it was covered in major media, and like the FDA advisory committee rooms were like literally covered with security, with armed guards. And you had people like, half the group, there'd be like hundreds of people that would show up going, you have blood on your hands.
Yeah.
And, and the other side's like, these drugs saved my life. The same thing that we hear today on every single thing that we're out there. Like they're bad. But then when you start really digging it. And so, and I know that, it's the same playbook that we see over and over and over and over and over and over.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. And the thing is too, I always hear people, here we are 20 years later, still dealing with the same issue. Look, to me, Kim, I don't think these black box warnings are enough. I don't know what the solution is necessarily, because you do have people that say these drugs have helped me. They've saved my life. I don't know why there is so much resistance from even the general public to want to acknowledge this, right? And I'll say this, if people knew the true risks of these drugs, I don't think the vast majority of people would take them, especially if they knew you could deal with potentially permanent side effects or you have severe suicidal ideation. And it's one thing to hear these things, right? You can hear you could potentially deal with these things. It's another thing to actually experience them. Because everybody I've talked to who has taken an SSRI, who has taken finasteride, even the ones that got somewhat kind of informed consent, they regret it. They regret taking it when they develop these symptoms. So even when you kind of get that informed consent, you don't really know what this experience is truly going to be like.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think first of all, I actually sit on the FDA, or I just spent 9 years on that same committee that in 91 didn't do their job, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I have seen in all my years of work is harms are never really talked about. And, like people just assume safe and effective. And I think there's this blind like trust, and you don't really think, like, I don't know about you, but I went and did, I went and jumped out of an airplane. What do you call them? Mm-hmm. Parachuting. And,
I've done that.
Yeah. And it's super fun, but they're telling you that there's a chance like whatever, that the parachute might not open and you could die. Sure. Right. But you're like thinking, they just tell you that's not going to really happen to you. Right. Mm-hmm. But until it does. And so exactly. I think that's kind of the thing with a lot of medicines, even if you're given informed choice, which I'm not really sure that people truly are.
I agree.
But even if you are, you don't really think it's going to happen to you. And then when it does happen to you, then you're like, oh, I should have listened, right? Number one, I should have paid attention. Or then you start speaking out, and you're gaslit, like you're crazy. You're making it up. But there's a lot of like, money and self-interest that are there to protect their, like the guilds of, like the doctor organizations and the mental health organizations, especially with the SSRIs. But I think, one idea, there's something that I recently posted, and it's somebody who has been severe withdrawal with antidepressants, Danny Gansky. And I saw a video of her like in the hospital, of her trying to get off these medications. And I was like, oh my God, imagine that part of your informed consent you had all of these like you saw these videos of people, and really, because that was like horrifying to me and she's in the hospital. I'm like, I can guarantee you when her parents put her on these drugs when she was little, they had no idea what they were saying yes to. But then seeing this is why they're out there fighting to, like, for people to really be aware. And so I think when you just said, even if you have all that new information, I still feel like we need to go upstream and say, should you even really be even taking these drugs?
Sure.
Like,
I agree with that.
Especially with the mental health drugs and whatnot. I think, I looked right after Woody died, and my doctor said, do you think you need something? And I looked at her and I'm like, well, I think it's what killed my husband, which she of course thought I was crazy, because there were no warnings. Right. And they always said like, oh, you just didn't know that he was depressed. And I'm like, I've lived with him. I'm pretty sure he wasn't depressed. Mm-hmm. And so, but when she said, do you think you need it? I go, well, aren't I supposed to hurt? My husband died. Yeah, and she goes, but you don't need to.
You don't need to?
Said I could and I'm like, yeah, I do. Like 22 years later, I can honestly say that it was even though that was one of the most painful experiences of my life, I needed to feel it. I needed to go through it. That's how you get to the other side. Like those pills aren't a mind eraser.
Right. Absolutely.
So.
Well, Kim, I think it's amazing. You've leveraged your pain throughout all this, and you've made such a difference in these communities and in this movement. And I think that's the most important thing that sufferers or families of sufferers can do. I don't think we shouldn't just let this go. This is a really important thing, and it's continuing to happen too. And I got so many things I want to comment on what you just said. So I guess number one, you talked about the informed consent, right? I think the numbers are much higher than we realize. So for example, with finasteride in particular, they say the number of people who can experience side effects, it's like 1% to 3%. I think it's honestly a lot higher than that. And when you go to your doctor and you tell them that you're experiencing these side effects, they gaslight you, like you said, right? I don't think those reports are getting to the FDA. I don't think they're being documented properly. So I think it's very underreported. And then also with finasteride in particular, you don't hear about all these additional side effects. They don't talk about the muscle wastage, the facial wastage, the lipoatrophy. I developed loose skin, the voice changes, the joint issues, the bone issues. I mean, these are things that doctors aren't telling people about. And the system as a whole doesn't even acknowledge that these symptoms can potentially occur in people. So you got to go online and read these forums. And what does the average person do when they read the forum? They dismiss it. They say, well, these are all a bunch of, nutcases. That's like the number one word I've heard, right? These are nutcases. Totally. These are people who are experiencing the nocebo effect. And so, the data is there, but people still continue to disregard it. So I think it's underreported. I think the side effect profile is a lot larger than we realize. And so, what do we do at that point? We got to continue advocating for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things I want to underreported. Same thing with back in the day, the side effect or a lot of the suicides with antidepressants and even like the withdrawal and whatnot. First of all, people don't know that the FDA, like even your doctors are technically, when you go in and report these side effects, they should be reporting it into the MedWatch system, but they don't. So right there in itself, it's underreported. And even if you report it to the doctors say, oh, we're going to report it to the drug company, it doesn't get reported. So I 100% agree with the idea that a lot of harms are underreported because they even say, and the MedWatch system that we have is super antiquated at the FDA. It should be there to serve as a signal. I mean, that's one thing we've been trying to do from day one because we always hear the MedWatch system, it's so out of date. It doesn't have the information. I'm like, okay, really? We can build websites for companies in my business in months, right?
Yeah.
Really
Takes
robust.
No time.
It doesn't take that long, but it's got to be a priority. So once I started digging into understanding how the FDA, the same people that approve the drugs are the same people who are going to remove them off the market or talk about harms. So there isn't an attitude of harms. I think people have to realize that I've come to say that the FDA is really a stepping stone to get the products on the market, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have the FDA to put your products on the market. And once you start looking at, who's paying for the applications for drug companies. I mean, the average person doesn't know a lot of this stuff. Neither do our doctors, which is really interesting.
Yep.
So that in itself, and I think that, people think, even when you just said 1% to 3%, well, I'm kind of guessing that your drug, kind of like the antidepressants, once it gets into the real world, which I think the real world is really what, like you and I are the people that, and it's who I've always said I advocate for is the middle of America, meaning the average person. It's not the people, when these drugs come onto the market, any drug, you got to remember, they're going to put the best conditions around it for the clinical trials to get what they need to have go forward. Right. So in itself, like just because it says they didn't see side effects. No, it's when millions of people start taking them. It's when the advertising kicks in. It's when they start getting overprescribed, or now you have and we see with the antidepressants, these online telehealth companies, right? Yeah. That it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And people a lot of times don't even connect the side effects to
Correct.
drug.
Correct.
Right? except for somebody like you, and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And I think it really has to be you and I was not a person that thought like I could make a difference, as a person. But the reality is once you start connecting the dots and you start doing it and you meet other people, you're like, wait, this is something that we need to talk about. It's the uncomfortable truth that we don't really want to actually maybe admit or look at. We're afraid, or like, oh my God, I've been taking this drug. And they're afraid to admit that too, right? I mean, there's so many things that's kind of tied up into the psyche of taking medicines. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say this. No one is going to care more about any harms, anything about a drug than you about you and your family. Like, no, the FDA doesn't live with them. Right. The doctors don't live with them. So it is really important that, like you're saying, and not back down, because I'm sure you get a lot of hate. I had hate.
Oh yeah. All the time. All the time. Yeah.
It's a playbook.
Yeah. Right. It's crazy. It really is crazy. I've always tried to tell people too, you're right. I do get a lot of hate. Naturally, you're going to when you go into a movement like this. I've always said my two primary objectives with this channel is to, number one, build awareness to give people true informed consent about these drugs. Because again, the vast majority of the side effects that people can experience aren't even acknowledged by the medical system. And number two, try to find targeted therapeutics, encourage research so we can develop targeted therapeutics for these injuries. Because for some people, the side effects don't go away. They continue to persist for a lifetime. And, that leads to suicides in itself. But then, we don't take those suicides into account as being caused by the medication, because it's like, well, they've been off the drug for 5 years, 10 years. That, it's out of their system at this point. Yeah, but it left persistent damage. But again, they don't want to make that connection there. Right. So it's really unbelievable. Kim, actually, you're kind of going through all the questions here that I was going to ask. This is great. This is awesome. But let me just go through these real quick just to make sure we cover some of this. If I got this correct, you filed a lawsuit against Pfizer after Woody's death, alleging that Zoloft's suicide risks were hidden from the public. Can you talk about what that process was like and what it was revealed to you about how difficult it is to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable?
Sure. Well, that was one of the things that we did. I call it the battle for Woody, is we did file a wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit against Pfizer. And what I didn't realize at the time is there were other Zoloft suicide cases out there. But it was interesting. That whole process is, well, first of all, they consider people like, we're all acceptable collateral damage, right? They know there's going to be some people are going to get harmed. So they're going to put some money aside. Money's never going to bring somebody back. And also, they're going to make so much money during the process, right? But we were able to, so my brother-in-law read a book by David Healy called Let Him Eat Prozac. And that was one of the first books he read. And he contacted David Healy and he talked about what happened to Woody. And he goes, oh, you should contact this law firm in LA, Baum Hedlund. And immediately when we told him that Woody had this head outside his body, well, they knew that because they had already been in the files of Pfizer and they had documents that have shown that the FDA knew, Pfizer's known about it. They've known that the bulk of the clinical trials, like most people, you only have to have 2 to get it FDA approved. But if you did 13 of them, it's going to still sit in the basement of, the drug companies, and it'll never go to the public. Right. But there was a document where they had, and I call it the Woody document because when I saw it, it was like heartbreaking for me. They had the FDA equivalent in South Africa wrote to the chief medical officer of Pfizer and said that they had doctors reporting patients outside their heads looking in on 50 milligrams, which is the same thing Woody had. And they said, oh, it happens on all SSRIs. We don't know why. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so you start looking at the documents and what the documents reveal. And that is probably why they'll do anything to keep it so you can't sue them, right? The drug companies, because they don't want the discovery and that discovery process. So that was during that time, another thing that happened, and it's where I learned this whole process of revolving doors. Pfizer, before the chief counsel for the FDA his name is Dan Troy, who worked on the outside at defense law firm, came in, got appointed into the FDA chief counsel, so head of legal, right, at the FDA with no congressional approval. Well, before he got approved, or before he went in, Pfizer had paid him almost over $300,000 for work that he did. Well, guess what? When he got inside the office, he then started to use his power and created something called the FDA preemption brief, a friend of the court brief. So he started intervening with this FDA brief in all these lawsuits against companies with basically Pfizer and Zoloft. And so I love that my lawyers, and how we discovered all this, my lawyers snuck into this conference that they were having for drug companies and counsel, the in-house counsel. And this guy said, make it a Hollywood pitch for us to intervene in your lawsuit. And so what was happening is in the brief basically said, even if Pfizer wanted to warn, we are the FDA, and we wouldn't have let them because we are the ultimate sayers of the product's labeling, which is not true, right?
Yeah, right.
And so a lot of judges threw lawsuits out because of this brief. And so we were able to expose it. Pfizer themselves came to court, federal court in Minneapolis, and tried to argue that brief. And the judge was like, if the FDA wanted to intervene, they could come here too and intervene, but they didn't. So Pfizer was trying to argue an FDA brief, and they tried it twice. And the judge was like, get it, kick it out. So eventually, I'm telling you, the whole process, it's really, really difficult. Pfizer, they were talking to neighbors. They would call up and send a fax to my therapist saying, we need to have all her notes. And thank God it's bad.
Wow.
So my therapist called me, and I'm like, she goes, just so you know, I got this email from the law firm saying, not my law firm. And so they were trying to use this intimidation. And so I immediately sent it over to my firm in LA, and they contacted and they're like, what are you doing? So they were going out, they were talking to my neighbors, and they're and they said, they're like, oh, we saw that I don't know what they were trying to do. They were saying, oh, your husband sweeps the driveway all the time. I'm like, have you met his parent? He grew up in a military family. He was really proud of his house. Sweep does not make him OCD. He's going to kill himself, whatever. So they tried everything. But the biggest thing I probably noticed when they had me, so by this time, remember, I'm out in DC and I'm super active. I'm working with Congress. They were doing big congressional hearings.
Right.
So when they had me under deposition, so they had me for 9 hours, guess what the first part of the whole deposition, all they wanted to talk about was who knew what where out in DC. How did I get Senator Grassley involved? How did the Minnesota Attorney General get involved? Who knows? Because I was taking binders of documents that we got out from the legal and sharing them with everybody in the world, because I'm like, wait, you guys, it belongs to everybody. And so I think, at the end of the day, it's really hard to hold drug companies accountable. But when you also have, and the money doesn't really do anything. I mean, yes, the money will never bring anybody back. But really the more important thing is what I've seen now subsequently when people try, if they're able to hold a company accountable, part of it is they won't let you ever tell your story in public. And so that's what we're seeing, another big drug that a lot of people, and I know I'm taking you on it because I've been doing this.
No, you're fine. No, this is incredible.
I'm taking you on a meandering, but right. Chantix, which is a lot of people, it's that to help people stop smoking.
Yes.
Okay. Cessation.
Yep.
So when it came on the market, so this will be all relevant to all your work too. When it came on the market, there was no black box warning. But then as harms started to emerge and people were reporting them to the FDA, ultimately, and there were lawsuits filed against Pfizer, they eventually put a black box warning, the same warning, that we, that was for neuropsychiatric and hallucinations, violence, etc., on Chantix. Well, meanwhile, like Pfizer settles 2,800 lawsuits for almost $300 million. Then they go to the FDA because I truly believe they learned from the antidepressant hearings. Like, we don't want these stories out in public.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want these victim stories out in public, and we don't want the experts or the lawyers to be talking about what they've seen either. Mm-hmm. So they shut up everybody, meaning as part of the settlement. So all these people that I was working with on Chantix that had websites, there were like people like me that had been harmed or had personal family experience. They, as part of the settlement, shut them up. They had to all remove their websites.
Oh my goodness.
So then when Pfizer went to the FDA and wanted the class-wide warning removed from the drug because they had done a new study in England or in the UK called the Eagle study. So I'm now sitting on the committee. And so I'm like super excited to ask about, like, I want to know about the victims I want to know about the lawyers, what kind of things they've seen. And guess what? None of them were there. And I got kicked off of that committee 3 days before my committee. And so my members that sat on that committee, the same one that in 91, they didn't have the information to know that there were 2,800 lawsuits and that none of those victims, people like you and I, couldn't even come and tell their story in public. So this is all happening as part of the culture of, and the culture of discussing harms. And again, this is why people don't think about it or don't know about them or say it's not worth it because I don't want to like be attacked. So I think all of this is relatable to whatever drug, and it's not just antidepressants. It's the whole system.
I'm honestly, it's shocking to hear your story and to hear everything you've been involved with. I mean, essentially, they're trying to suppress this information so it doesn't get out to the general public, so people can't tell their stories. I'm kind of speechless, to be honest with you. I mean, you hear about the corruption. Everyone wants to say it's a conspiracy theory, and then you actually hear about this stuff. It's like this is really happening. This is reality. But it's not getting out to the general public. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part and it's why and most people like honestly just give up. Like give up. It's just not worth it because if they're not going to believe it. But even I remember, so like the name calling, and that's why when I fast forward and saw all the stuff like during, just even Pfizer or during COVID with the vaccine, right? I mean, it's the same thing with all of the people who've been injured with the COVID vaccine. I didn't have kids, so I never went down the vaccine, pathway. But I after I testified in the U.S. Senate, I remember we went to go pick up our bags at one of the senator's office, Senator Dodd, and he goes, "You should know that the NAMI, which is National Alliance for Mentally Ill, their chief lobbyist." Came around with my written testimony, even though in addition to I did the oral testimony, and said, "Don't believe a word she's saying. She's a Scientologist."
Oh my goodness.
He went to all of the offices saying I was a Scientologist. I'm like, come on, that game, you guys have been playing that game since 91 when they had the Prozac. It's like, oh, this is all conspiracy. This is the Scientologist. Yeah. Yep. And so it's that same game that we've seen over and over. And I remember and of course at first when I was called a Scientologist, I would get all mad. I'm like, I'm not. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. I love one of my friends whose 12-year-old daughter was given Zoloft for test anxiety. And she literally after sitting on her dad's lap on Christmas Day, she went up to her bedroom, 12 years old, and hung herself.
Oh my God.
And so her and I have been really active in this back in the day. And her response whenever she was told that she was a Scientologist, because I would want to fight and defend myself. And she goes, just say, if we were Scientologists, we would have known and we would never have taken the drug.
Right.
And I was that's such a good response. But instead I'm like, no, stop calling people this. You're game playing and game calling or calling people like you that are out there telling your story a nut job. No, this is just the way it's uncomfortable. Again, it's the inconvenient, uncomfortable truth. And there's a lot of money trying to protect the product or narrative that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So of course they're going to come attacking.
It's so unbelievably slimy because people try to do everything in their power to discredit me too. And look, we've had several parents on this channel whose child has committed suicide as a result of either SSRIs or finasteride. And for me, it's like, I can't let it go. I can't let it go at this point. My life has been just royally sabotaged in so many different ways. And I'm seeing more and more people get exposed to this. It's not going away anytime soon either. That's the scary part. With the rise of these telehealth companies selling these drugs, SSRIs, finasteride, all these different supplements that can potentially harm people. It's like at some point the buck has to stop,
Yeah.
And for me, I can't, I've always said, I say every couple months, I got to take a step back from doing this channel because it's very overwhelming for me. It's very hard to do this. I still have a personal life. I got a wife. I got a job, a career. I mean, I got all these things going on, but then I'm like, I can't stop because here's another email I received from somebody who wants to share their story. It's like, this has to get out there. And I got to believe we are on the verge of a revolution with this, just where things are going to fundamentally change with the medical system, and people are going to start receiving that true informed consent. And these stories are going to get out there, and people are going to hear about this and realize, oh my God, these drugs have been on the market for 20, 30 plus years. They've caused all this damage. And look at the limited response by the FDA and the regulatory bodies. They have not been doing their jobs. It's unbelievable.
I think I think you're like me, I still keep a foot in advertising. And I also think that the advertising perspective has been really important for me because I understand it's marketing. Like even one of the things I learned in like the lawsuit, one of the first places lawyers go, if they get to do discovery is the marketing department because you start seeing how the game is played. Right. But you're right. Like how many times, I have wanted to quit because this work is grueling. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, you don't get paid for it. Like, this is, I mean, you understand that. I mean, you know the personal toll, but then you get another email or you get a call from somebody and you're like, how come I didn't know this? Right. I'm like, and again, it's probably why I have been doing it for 22 years. I do know that I sometimes do need to take a break emotionally, or have to have my own ways of dealing with the stress of it all. Yeah. But all we're trying to do, and I'm guessing this for you, is I'm trying to plant seeds, educate, because don't be blindsided like we were. Mm-hmm. Yep. Don't be blindsided. Like, I wish we would have known. I wish we would have questioned. I wish, I look back and I wish Woody would have known that he was getting a drug that was never approved for sleep. Like this off label. He didn't even know the question. He just blindly trusted. Yeah. And, it's why I still, even the system really isn't about protecting you and I. It's why I try to still educate like doctors about, I put together this whole like spider web, because I've seen it as a spider web where the doctor and patients are kind of trapped in the whole medical system. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that people do ask questions, don't blindly trust, and absolutely. The work that you do, I'm glad that you're doing it because I know the work that it takes. And I also know the personal toll it takes on somebody like you who keeps just wanting to tell the truth, right? Yeah, the uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, I appreciate those kind words. I really do. I don't deal well with injustices. I really don't. When I see an injustice happen, I feel like I have to kind of intervene and address it. That's not the virtue signal. It's just how I am. It's how I inherently am. It makes it tough for me too, because I'm a sufferer. I'm somebody who has been damaged by these drugs. Having to continue with this channel, it does take an emotional toll. I mean, even from your position, I mean, you've been doing this for, I think you said 22 years. It's incredibly hard. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you feel like you're making no traction, but then, like you said, you receive that next email and you're like, okay, I got to keep going. I got to keep pushing because this is such an important cause and people have to be aware of this. So I really do appreciate that. Some of these questions here, you've probably already answered. If you have, we can just go to the next one. You spent years inside the FDA's advisory system. What has that experience shown you about how drug decisions are actually made behind closed doors?
Well, this one was very shocking for me. So like I said, in the beginning of my work, I would go to the FDA and be a open public hearing person, right? Because everybody should, if you've never watched an FDA process, I think it's really important. But sitting on that committee, I'm the consumer rep. So we get to see the data come, before the FDA. We're discussing, usually when they hold an advisory committee, it's because there's some kind of safety information. Maybe they want to take a warning off. Maybe there's, some question that the FDA has before they actually approve it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, here's what's interesting. Part of what you're looking at, and we get a chance to actually question the drug company, and then we get to question the FDA, and then we deliberate. And it's usually a question of like, do the risks outweigh the benefits, or just those kind of voting questions. Sure. Well, it's interesting. Harms are very rarely discussed, right? They're assumed that they'll be caught down the road. Well, you and I no. I mean, you've been fighting your issue. I've been with antidepressants. I knew that it took years because you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? Right. But if the system's not set to track it even or to help it, before too much harm happens. So anyways, I always tell people, if you actually listen, I think everybody should, I was shocked that doctors don't have to understand the FDA process.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I know.
It's super crazy. If they don't understand it, how can they, and they don't know the critical thinking questions, but how can I trust them? And so, but sitting on this committee, all of a sudden it'll get time to vote. And, those open public hearing testimonies are powerful. Sure. But if you think about who comes now, unlike back in the day where it was people who've been harmed, most people don't come and even know that they can tell their story. So most of it's really quite organized, meaning the people that they have come are maybe people who are in the clinical trials, who want the drug on the market, or they have funding, even though they say that they have no financial, they won't get anything out of the, out of the hearing. But most of them come that have ties to the company that has a product on the market or the disease. And so you never hear from the clinical trial participant that exited, right? Right. You only hear from the ones that are like, we need this drug. Don't we need this product on the market. We got to save the patients. Yeah. I'm like, AKA customers. But anyways, so those testimonies are powerful because that will also influence, when we come to vote, and you'll hear people on the committee, that'll be like, we need to put, there's probably more of a bias of putting more products on the market and assume that the safety will be dealt with later. Right. Right. So a lot of times they'll say, yes, I'm voting yes for this product because clearly there's a need for it. Clearly a need for it. And then, but I'm not sure about safety, but, and so then I'll be like the opposite. I'm like, well, I'm voting opposite for the exact reason he just said, which is I don't think the safety is known about the safety, and we don't have enough guardrails in play to actually, once it's given to millions of people, we don't have those systems in place. And so I've really realized that the FDA is kind of that whole process. Even the people who are on those committees are usually stacked, meaning, you think, oh, there's a doctor on there. Well, they come from academic institutions. Well, who controls academic institutions? The research, the funding. So even if they don't personally take money from from drug companies, they know their institution does. And so I think there's a lot of self-censoring that goes on committees. And then people will say, for me, I'm thinking, well, I want a real world doctor, not an academic doctor sitting on that committee. I want the real doctor who actually sees patients. I want that perspective, but those aren't the people who are sitting on these committees. Right. Right. It's very controlled and
a lot of conflict of interest, basically. A lot of conflict of interest. Yep. I was in a virtual FDA listening session probably about 2.5 years ago for finasteride. And there were probably 6 patients on there telling their stories, including there was actually a mother as well whose son had committed suicide like a year and a half prior from finasteride. And we all got, I think it was like 6 or 7 minutes to tell our stories. And, you just go down one by one. You hear about how this person lost their career. This mother lost her child. I developed slurred speech and anhedonia and muscle wastage and all these different things. You hear these stories. And I recall what really got to me at the end was that I don't recall how many people were on the FDA panel. I want to say it was like 30 to 40. But at the end, they put this disclaimer on there for the suicide hotline. And it was like, if you're feeling suicidal, please make sure you contact this number right here. It just felt like it was for liability purposes to cover themselves up. Like, you just heard our stories. You heard how this medication damaged us. The last thing you guys are going to say, oh, here's the suicide hotline. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
It didn't feel sincere in the least bit. It just felt like something they had to do. And that was 2.5 years ago. Nothing's been done about the medication. It's still being marketed very aggressively by telehealth companies. I think it was just it's documented that the FDA did this listening session. You just feel like you go through these motions essentially, and nothing ever really gets done. It's very frustrating. And it's very traumatic too, to sit there to talk to, 40 FDA representatives who I think one of which actually voted against putting suicidal ideation on the drug back in 2011. So he's listening to us talk. He's listening to this mother again, whose son committed suicide. It just feels, I don't know how to put this appropriately. It feels slimy, I guess. Yeah. Best way I can put it. I don't know how else to say it. It's just, there's so much corruption. There's so many conflicts of interest. And it's so hard too, Kim, because I don't want to come from a position where I'm demonizing the medical system as a whole, or I'm demonizing all doctors. Then you get labeled as a conspiracy theorist. You're anti-medication, you're anti-doctors. It's like, I'm not, but there has to be accountability at some point for this harm and this damage that's being done. Lives are taken all the time. You mentioned the COVID vaccines. We talk about PSSD. We talk about post-finasteride syndrome, SSRIs, just all these different medications. I don't know what the numbers are. To be honest with you, I feel like they got to be potentially even in the millions of people over the past 30 to 40 years who have potentially taken their lives. They committed suicide, or they've been so damaged by these drugs, it just basically shuts down their body. I don't think we can put a number on it right now, but I think it's a lot higher than we know.
Yeah, I think, there are people out there that have been studying the harms, and that's really the side that I've come from. So I always have to say the same thing. I'm not anti-medicine. Right. I'm not anti-drug, but I'm pro-transparency. I'm pro-information. Mm-hmm. Be honest. Tell us the truth. Like, I look back, thinking about the warnings. And so here's the thing, like when you're like, oh, well, we'll just put that suicide warning on, like if you feel suicidal, as if it's like your fault. Like,
you're right.
Yeah. You're just, it puts the onus back on the patient and makes it seem like it's their issue. Like, oh,
victim blaming.
Victim blaming, like, oh, it's your issue. And, but there's people who've been studying this for a long time, and they think, like, I will say in presentations, because it used to be the fourth leading cause of death. There are people who actually will say it's the second leading cause of death is properly prescribed medications, properly prescribed.
Yeah.
That is not all the legal, but I think, again, where we start off in the beginning, a lot of harms are like one-off here and then over here, because it's not everybody that's going to experience it. Although they might experience things and that they don't know that it is the drug. But it's not, and our bodies are not all the same, right? So we have to even start there. So when they, say it's safe and effective, that doesn't mean it's for everyone, right? Like, we don't know that. That's for the average that's been really well curated to get it on the market, right? Mm-hmm. But once you start connecting the dots, or imagine an entire plane, like planes go down, like 9/11, right?
Right.
You would actually go and investigate. But when they're one-offs, you're like, oh, that's just this, that's this. And there is no like concerted effort. But I think that's the power of what you're doing today and what I continue and is to connect communities, and also connect communities that we're both doing different, like I'm coming mostly from the SSRIs and antidepressants, FDA, and you're coming from yours, but it's the same issue.
Yes, it is.
Same issue. It's the same issue, which, that's where we're coming. But one of the other things that I thought was shocking is after Wood died and we went with another family and we brought some experts and we actually met with the top FDA officials, Dr. Lochran and Temple back in the day. And I really, 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 this is like how naive I was. I really thought that they would be interested in, like, we come in, we had like this private meeting and we and said, like, how did a guy go from not sleeping to head outside the body dead in 5 weeks?
Yeah.
This would be like, this is like a perfect kind of storm, right?
Right.
They literally said, oh, you're just an anecdote. That's just anecdotal. So it made me really realize at the beginning, like, they don't go investigate like I thought they would, like the FAA and the NTSB. I thought, like the people who build and approve the planes aren't the ones that if there's a plane crash, right, and go look for the black box. They don't, that's not the case. And when he literally said, you are just an anecdote, I'm like, oh my God, this is what because we didn't see it in the exactly what he said. We didn't see it in the double-blinded placebo-controlled study. Yeah. And so right there, and if that is the kind of the attitude. Yeah. If that's the attitude, we really need to, you and I as the public, really have to think twice and be the ones that take the power into our hands and question from the beginning, question.
Yeah. So you're just an anecdote, but then we have a million other anecdotes over here as well. So it's like, at what point do you address this? It's so disgusting how many people want to dismiss this, the regulatory bodies. I mean, it's really unbelievable to me. I've heard that before too. You're 1 in a million. Sorry. Yeah. It's like, I'm actually not 1 in a million. You go online, look at all these stories of people experiencing the exact same thing as me. You're going to see this is a lot more common than you want to make it out to be. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, okay, if you're going to, like, if that's going to be the game, that we prove things really quick and have it, because, the drug companies actually control every part of that process to get a product on the market. Yep. They design the clinical trials that get FDA approval, right? They decide what data goes to the FDA. But so if that's the game we're playing, FDA, then you better have mechanisms in place or like go do research when you start seeing those 1 in a million, or you connect all of it, right? Like the harms, then we better have the harms, because when you start connecting all of this, go and like, where's the research? Like with all your stuff, there should be there should be research. Who are the people whose bodies aren't handling this? Right. Is there like missing, when I hear, like with the antidepressants, I know that they say you can tell if you have like a missing enzyme that in the way of process. How come we're not being told any of this? Like if you decide to even take the drug, you know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a lot of things that could be done on the regulatory agency if it was a priority.
From what I can tell, most of the research that's come out that demonstrates the severity and the damage these drugs can cause have all been independent researchers, independent studies done. A lot of them patient funded as well. So patients who are damaged, who are sick from these drugs, have to basically take money out of their own pockets to fund this research, because the medical system as a whole isn't funding it themselves. They have no interest in proving that these drugs can cause damage, right? That'll basically assign the blame to them. They'll have to admit, okay, yeah, these drugs, are causing severe side effects, and they've been on the market for 30, 40 plus years. So it actually you kind of already answered this, but it goes into the next question here. Many assume the FDA is fully independent, but the question is it? And how much influence do pharmaceutical companies really have over the process?
Yeah, well, I always thought it was separate, right?
Yeah, I did too.
Until you get in there. The FDA doesn't do clinical trials. Everybody's got to remember that. It's to get the product on the market, it's a threshold. It's a business for the companies to design it, to get it onto the market. And once it's on the market, they have no regulation over how a doctor uses it, right? Or prescribes it. So like off-label, people don't even know what off-label is. So they can go and use that. Then I think it was during the AIDS crisis in the mid 90s, where there was all that public pressure of it taking too long for the FDA to approve medications, right? New life-saving medications. Right. So they created, like, Congress put something into action called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, PDUFA, which is basically like a fee that every drug company pays to have the FDA, approve their drugs. Mm-hmm. And it's a must pass legislation every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And what people don't realize is now it's like over 50%, 60% of the FDA is actually funded by the industry in which they regulate. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. So we actually, somebody was telling me how they went to a meeting and it was, I know what it was. It was one of our lawyers, that was in deposition, where literally the FDA called the drug company their client. And he's like, wait a minute. Whoa.
Wow.
Isn't the public your client? Mm-hmm. So it creates this imbalance structure, right? Of are they really looking out for our best interests? Mm-hmm. Or is it about protecting, the system? So I used to think they were independent. It's not, just because an FDA marks something safe and effective. It's marketing. It's often marketing terms. So
the way I understand it, so the pharmaceutical companies are the ones conducting the clinical trials. They submit those clinical trials to the FDA. The FDA, either approves or disapproves them. Doesn't the pharmaceutical companies, they can basically, the way I understand it is they can conduct as many trials as they want, 100 trials for a new drug. Let's say 97 of them show serious adverse effects, but 3 of them show, positive result. Do they only submit the 3 that show that positive result? They can basically only submit what they want to that fits their narrative. Is that true?
That is true. So what people don't, with FDA, they're the standard, and we've all been trained to believe that the FDA is the gold standard, right? Yeah. And you only need to have 2 double-blinded placebo-controlled studies. But if you've done, so let's say like in your case, you just said 100 and you get 3. It's always about manipulating to get that where it shows that the placebo benefit. This is why litigation is really important, because in the antidepressants, that's when they got into the files and saw that there were all these other trials that were conducted from the beginning. So not independent stuff. We're looking at the beginning that sat in files. And so that's why you don't really hear about a lot of these harms. And again, remember, at the end of the day, it's big business, and they're not drug companies are not accountable to you and I. They're accountable to their shareholders.
That is unbelievable. It's so important that this information gets out there. I really appreciate you sharing all that. I don't want to take up too much of your time here. Do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
I love talking about this. This is what it drives people crazy. My friends are like, oh my gosh, it's like my cocktail hour party. But I do. And I think it's really, once you start diving in and then you're like, I look back at, so again, my marketing background, right? Mm-hmm. I look at, and so I helped bring this conference to the US after attending conferences all over the world on harm in medicine, right? Mm-hmm. And there was one in Amsterdam called Selling Sickness. And it was in 2010. And almost every example was from the US. There were a handful of us, and most of them were attorneys and myself, because I love to travel and learn. And so I'm like, I remember telling the organizers, why don't you bring it to the States? And they're like, no, this is your issue, right? So I ultimately brought one of this conference called Selling Sickness to the US in 2013.
Oh, wow.
And which, I've been talking about these where no one cared back then. I mean, I'm still feeling like I want to poke a knot, my eyeball out with a pen.
Sure.
But I'm like, but I must clearly like it. But anyways, so one of the things that from that marketing of Selling Sickness, right? Mm-hmm. There was an article of the CEO of Merck in the 70s in Fortune magazine. I had to actually go and get it from the library out of microfiche, which nobody knows what microfiche is. And it was the CEO of Merck said, I wish I could we can only sell to sick people, but if I could sell to healthy people, I want to be like Wrigley's gum.
Oh my goodness.
And sell to everyone. And so then that's where I started going, oh, wait. Yeah. And you think about it. Oh, you got juicy fruit, you got whatever, I don't chew gum, but all the different flavors. And now we get the system that's created cradle to grave to keep us patients are customers. So I love to say that all the time, thinking we got to just remember that. And I think the hard part is we've just given our power away as people because you're sick or you think it might help you. And so, but at the end of the day, it's a business. We got to remember that. Just remember that.
Yep, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. So the next question here, you fought for stronger suicide warnings on antidepressants. Why do you think there's still resistance to acknowledging those risks today?
Well, first of all, we did fight to get those warnings on, and most people don't realize that they stop at age 24. And so, which has never made sense because some of the data that we got out from the lawsuit, because in the US or the UK, they have to show all the clinical trials. It's all ages that need to be warned, right?
Absolutely.
And it's all ages because the drug doesn't know that you're 24 today and 25 tomorrow. So you're no longer like that. I mean, just where's common sense, right? But I think part of it is kind of the same thing, what you just said of like, we're going to put that suicide warning on, like it's just dismissed. Like, oh, they have to put that on it for legal reasons, right?
Yes.
Or, I think, well, of course somebody's going to kill themselves. They're depressed. Well, no, that's not, so it's always the same blame game.
Yep.
And then I think there's so much like right now with like the mental health crisis. There's so many people who have parts of the puzzle, right? You've got you've got the mental health clinics. Then you've got like, there's so much tied up in this whole idea of mental health too, that I think there's just nobody wants to actually think that these drugs that are meant to help us can actually hurt us.
Yeah.
And, I didn't talk about this when we talked about the lawsuit, but there is one document that came out from under seal, and it was a FDA document from the 1990s. It was an internal memo, and it was during this time, Zoloft, Pfizer was trying to get their product approved in other countries. And a lot of the European countries had serious concerns about efficacy, right? But so the FDA, this document was talking about that, but they knew that it was during the AIDS crisis where there was so much pressure on the regulatory agency. But the last line of that memo says, we're going to come under attack from decades from or years from now for not being as demanding as we ought to be for establishing the efficacy of antidepressant products. So I think people don't even understand that there were issues, not even about harms, about efficacy. And so I think there's just so many people have been on them, who've been taking them, who've been on them for years, who want to protect the drug or the product, or can't believe that they would be taking a product that could actually hurt them, or I think when people try to get off, I know you've talked to people who like the PSSD crowd or even the withdrawal, they can't get off them, and they go and they tell their doctors, and and they're having side effects, and the doctors, it's like, it's your disease. So everything seems like it's been the perfect, evilly perfect crime.
Yeah, it's like the perfect storm, to be honest with you. So, I mean, and that's what I hear when people who are taking SSRIs are experiencing, suicidal ideation, they blame the depression. They don't want to blame the drug itself. It's the same thing with finasteride. There was a recent study that came out by Meyer Brizes. He basically demonstrated that there could potentially be thousands of people who have been harmed or who have committed suicide over the past 20 years since finasteride has essentially been on the market. And the number one response I've seen from people is, well, they're balding, so they clearly have depression from balding, and so they take their lives. It's like, no, that's not what this is. The drug is causing them to have these suicidal thoughts. And I've always said too, it's not that they necessarily have suicidal thoughts from the drug. It's the fact that they develop these very serious, life-altering, persistent symptoms, and they're left in the dust with no help, no treatment, no validation. So they end up taking their lives. I think it honestly has more to do with that, with the lack of the lack of support that they receive, but it's always blaming something else. Oh, well, you're going bald, so you're clearly depressed. That's all it is.
Oh my God. I just remember that same thing. I'm like, there, even with Woody, when people are like, stressed, I'm like, he like was super excited about his job. Like, he couldn't handle it. So he's just got like, all right, I'm going to just go off myself. Right.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
I mean, come on, you guys. Like Woody was smart enough that but he had this side effect, which it's the side effect that people, and I always like to remind people of this. It's called akathesia, which
is a bad one.
You probably know, where it's like this extreme agitation inside, burning, head outside the body. You feel detached, right?
Yep.
Well, that's the side effect that that Pfizer actually kept from the doctors, right? But so the chief medical officer, Roger Lane, wrote an article that was in a medical journal that talked about that if a patient gets akathesia, it's less about the disease and more about the drug. It's drug induced.
Yep.
That quote unquote, his words, not mine, death can be a welcome result. So that was an article that ran, and I have it. But what wasn't in the public's domain was a memo that he sent, that same doctor sent to his field staff. So the sales reps said that journal article may be of interest to neurobiologically inclined psychiatrists, but not general practitioners. Well, the bulk of these drugs are written by GPs.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly
so they can't
right.
Get that side effect. So to your point, where they're like, they're just getting bald, like they can't handle that they're getting bald. No, if they're having akathesia, and they even say that if it's distressing enough, like death can be a welcome result.
Unbelievable.
Like, stop blaming the people. Like, stop blaming people.
It's so corrupt, Kim. It's so unbelievably corrupt. I mean, akathesia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I've talked to people who have that. It just sounds horrendous. You can't sit still. Like you said, you've got this burning sensation in your body. I understand why that would drive somebody to commit suicide, right? But they still want to blame the patient and not the drug itself, which initiated, the akathesia.
Totally.
It's unbelievable.
I think that's why it's one of those things. It's why I can't stop. It's obviously you can't stop. It's because you're watching this, and at the end of the day, you're like, we are the ones that have to push back and not blindly trust. And some of those things, like, when you look at, when you think about, like, I'm like, well, clearly that drug didn't work for Woody. Why did he even get put on it? Right. And I'm sure there's things like, you're like, wait a minute, why did I do this?
Right.
All for what? And now I'm fighting this, and I've had all this other stuff happen.
Right.
Was it worth it? It worth it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll tell you this. If I had gotten true informed consent for finasteride, there's no way I would have ever touched the drug. I've been bodybuilding for the past, 15, 16 years of my life. If you told me I could potentially lose muscle permanently, that would have been enough for me to be like, nope, don't want to deal with that, right? Yeah. I've spent my entire life developing my personality, right? If you told me my personality could now be compromised, where I have the equivalent of a TBI as a result of cognitive dysfunction and anhedonia, I would have been like, no, thanks. I rely on my personality for my social life, for my job. My wife fell in love with this guy who had this particular personality. All been taken from me permanently at this point. It's like, if you had given me that true informed consent, there's no way I would have ever come near that drug.
Yeah.
But again, they don't acknowledge those symptoms. They just want to say, well, the neurological side effects are, again, a result of you balding. You're worried about that. You're depressed. That can cause cognitive dysfunction in itself. You have the anhedonia because you're depressed. I'm so sick and tired of the narrative. And again, this is why we speak out and talk about these things.
Absolutely. And I think, and it's important, like, when everybody always asks, like, what can I do? And I go, you know what? One of the number one things you can do is not be afraid to speak out on your, and even if it feels like no one cares, there are people who do care, that are people that are out advocating. But I think the more we are not afraid or think it's us, or, I think that's really important. So I am a big believer in the work you're doing and keeping it alive.
No, and I really appreciate that. I think one of the biggest things I hear from people too, who are in the, professional corporate world, is that they're worried about, losing their job, being fired as a result of speaking out. Look, I mean, I work in the corporate environment myself. I work for a $1 billion company. There has never been any retaliation as a result of me speaking out. And I've told my leadership about this. I've told my coworkers, I've been featured in the Daily Mail, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, GQ magazine at this point. I got nothing to hide, to be honest with you. That for me, there really is no stigma to it at this point because so many people have been harmed, and I want to do my best to reduce that stigma. And I guess it's kind of ironic, the anhedonia doesn't really make me feel any sense of embarrassment at this point either. Oh, yeah. It's like, you want to give me a hard time, but I really don't care. Yeah, no, it's exactly. It's almost worked to my advantage in some sense.
Right.
No, this movement is far more important than my privacy is. And I think more people are starting to kind of get into that same mindset and step up and talk about their stories. And I really believe at some point we're going to reach that tipping point, and there is going to be a profound change fundamentally within the medical system. I don't know when it's going to come, but I think it's going to hopefully come here soon,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's why we have to, from day one, the same thing. I remember always because, back in the day when Woody died, first of all, I would never take on anything, right? Woody was always the guy that would take on, he'd be like, hey, let's go get the neighborhood to sign, because they were going to put 2 cell phone towers in our neighborhood. Wanted me to go get petitions signed. I'm like, not a chance. You'll never win the city council and fighting this big cell phone companies. And I remember what he said, Kim, I'd rather try like hell and lose than do nothing at all.
Oh yeah. I love it. I love that.
That's what he said. And I remember the irony of it all is it's almost like when he died, he passed the baton to me and said, oh, really? You didn't want to help with the cell phone towers, but now you're going to go out and do Pfizer or the FDA. And I'm
carrying on the legacy. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's this weird, because I was never this person. Yeah. And it's why I keep doing it. But even then, when people are like, well, you can't take on. And I said, why not? If somebody, because there were a lot of people back in 91 that were trying to do this warning stuff, right? And why not? It didn't get done. Why not me? Why not you?
Absolutely.
Because if it can help somebody else, that they're not I've been given this ability and the passion, which, not everybody has the passion. Some people want to, and that's okay. But why not go and try to educate? Because the other side of not being informed and not knowing the information. I wouldn't want anybody to go through that heartache that is real, that I wanted to that pain. I wanted to claw my heart out. I've never felt a pain like that.
Of course.
And so that is why I do what I do, and I don't care. And I remember people, I said, if anything ever happens to me, because that's the other beauty of speaking out. You've been out there enough. So I remember always saying, if something happens to me, people are like, Pfizer. And I go, if something happens to me, I'm pretty sure I can tell you I'm not suicidal. Yep. So nothing's gonna and if something happens to me, I know where I'm going. So, I'm not worried.
Absolutely. Very well said. Let me just see here. So you face powerful institutions head on. How do you stay grounded and keep pushing forward in the face of resistance or attempts to silence you, which you kind of already talked about? But
I think one of the things that have been really important to me is my faith's super important to me.
Beautiful.
I think faith is one way. Shortly, Woody always said when he died, he goes, throw my ashes in the middle of Lake Michigan. And so we were out in the middle of Lake Michigan 6 weeks after Woody died, when we started putting all this together. And I'm holding this box of Woody's ashes, and my brother-in-law, who is my sister's husband, who put it all together that first night, we looked down in the middle of Lake Michigan, and I'm like, what is that floating by? It was this book. And I go, does that say what I think it does? And he goes, yeah, it was a red book in gold letters. It said the Holy Bible. And it floated right by us at that moment. And in that, it was unbelievable. Thank God we both saw it, because otherwise they'd just say I was a grieving widow. But I was like, wow. In that moment, I knew that there was something so much higher than, than me, and that Woody was good. And so I think faith has kept me grounded. And then working out and moving my body and yoga and lifting weights, feeling, and being in nature. But there are times, and then also realizing that there are times that, I need to take a break. I need to go take a break. and not talk about this stuff and then I get like, even if I think I'm going to quit, I come right back. So because I've seen the tolls. Like I had a really good friend of mine, and I'll never forget her. Her daughter, I got to know her because her daughter was put on NuvaRing, which is or birth control, NuvaRing, and 24 years old, and she died of a pulmonary embolism. And she fought the company Merck and had a big lawsuit. It was really all about getting these warnings put on the drug. Yep. And so I was helping her, but there was one Christmas I come home from being out of town. I have this letter, and I have a box of all her stuff. And she said, I don't think I can handle this anymore. I'm going to go be with my daughter. And I was like, wait, did she just like take her? Like, I'm like, what? And so I talked to her husband and her son, and that family lost their daughter and their mom, her mom was strong, and she was like, I don't know that I can keep handling this evilness that I've seen. And I was like, wow, that is why people like that are out there speaking have to also take care of themselves, because it's a brutal, and I don't know that people, but I also believe that on this side of earth or on the other side, when we go somewhere, it will be dealt with. Because these are people's lives that you are like playing with, all at the cost of making money. Yep.
Absolutely. Very well said, Kim. I know it's tough to tell those stories too, and I've talked to plenty of people, again, whose children have taken their lives from this. And that to me is really one of my motivating factors. The more stories I hear about this, it's like, this cannot keep happening. At the very least, maybe somebody can see this channel, see these people speaking out, and maybe they were on the fence about taking these drugs and they decide not to now because they hear these stories. And, I'm hoping that will potentially save lives in itself. The Bible story is a beautiful one too. I think you talked about that on Alex Clark, if I remember correctly. I think I heard that when I was listening to the podcast. So I appreciate you sharing that on here. It's, it's almost multifactorial, all these different factors that come into play that motivate us to continue speaking out and doing this. And again, just want to reiterate, I understand where you get burnt out and you tell yourself, I'm taking a step back. And then you get that next email and you're like, nope, I've got to keep going,
Keep going. Exactly.
Just a few more questions here. What advice would you give to families who have lost loved ones and want to channel that pain into meaningful advocacy?
Well, I think one of the best things for me personally was, they call it like the 6th stage of grief. And what I realized in trying to do the work that I did, I was also healing me while I was out helping somebody else not go through the pain. And I think that has been really probably one of the greatest gifts and it's interesting because even when I was going through right after Wood died, I thought, well, because the funeral, I mean, what else are you supposed to do? Go to a suicide support group, right? So I go, and it was the most awful experience I ever had. I went once, and they were all like, and I'm like, oh my God, this is what it's like. So I went to a faith group, grief share, which was amazing. And I remember them saying that one of the best ways to help yourself and when you're going through grief is to go help somebody else. Yeah. Even just go volunteer. It doesn't have to be in the same space. It could be like going to do a food shelter or do something, and you realize, whoa, and you take the focus off of you, and you realize there are other people too that are hurting, and somehow that helps you. It's like the weirdest thing. I don't understand, but like it helps.
Right. Absolutely. And I've always said I think for us, whether you're a sufferer or you're a family member of a sufferer, I mean, you have to find a way to leverage that pain to make a difference, to help, stop this from happening to hopefully the next person. And for me, that's kind of how I cope. It makes me feel like I'm not just letting this affect my life and that's it. Like you got to roll over and accept it. It's like I'm trying to do my best to prevent this from happening to the next person. So I can relate entirely to what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think there's something about this idea of pain that if we let it will alchemize, and it does eventually. You realize, whoa, that, there's some good that came out of it, but we have to, I think we also have to have a new relationship a little bit with pain, because I don't think that, I think that's But it is interesting how it transforms us if we use it to help others.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, Kim, the final question here. You've seen both the human cost and the institutional mindset up close. From your perspective, what does it truly mean to practice medicine with moral courage? And how do we start rebuilding that culture?
Ooh, I love moral courage, because I think that starts out as, that's a basic kind of principle that I
Absolutely.
think it's having the courage to do the hard right, not the easy wrong. The easy wrong is to turn a blind eye. The hard right is to actually maybe investigate, keep your eyes open, keep your heart open. When you hear and you see patients, especially like I think about medicine, like realize that these are families' lives. Like even that means that you might have to look in your mirror, your soul's mirror, and realize that, wait, I have a role in this as well. But I think it comes back to doing the hard right, not the easy wrong. The easy wrong is to turn a blind eye. I'm going to worry, like I won't look at it. But when you actually sit in it, you're like, whoa, we have to do something with it.
Absolutely. Very well said. Kim, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love having these conversations anytime you want to have them.